Okay. So after you realize, it's almost like deductive reasoning,
Hmm.
where you realize this probably was mercury. You must have looked up all the mercury, all the symptoms, and everything started to fit perfectly.
I found online Mad Hatter's disease, and I don't know if your viewers or listeners, remember what that is. But if you, Mad as a Hatter, all right, think of Alice in Wonderland. But Mad as a Hatter, it came about because people making felt hats literally went mad, and the reason is because they were using mercury to attenuate, kill off different molds and things that get into the felt, and that's what they were using to make the hats. And so, mad as a hatter, I had all the symptoms. I was mad as a hatter. So that's what actually led me to realize I think I have mercury toxicity, but that's an acute poisoning, meaning that you're working with mercury every day. And, then obviously it would show up on a blood test. And that's why I did it. Maybe I have this. But a year or so later, then the endocrinologist said, yeah, wrong test. It won't show up on a blood test or just a urine test. He did lead me to chelate it out of the tissues. And you have to be careful with that too, because many people go to their doctor, they do an IV chelation and then measure the urine. And certain things show up very well in that, lead and some other metals. But again, as I pointed out, aluminum, mercury don't show up very well in that test. But I had so many metals off the chart. I realized that my pathways were shut down. And even I did still have an abnormal mercury level on the urine test that didn't show up on the blood test. But again, using a chelator is very dangerous for some people because what happens is you get a lot in at once in the IV, and then you go home and your body's dumping these metals and then they redistribute. So the way we do the test today is we keep people on oral chelators after the challenge for at least 3 days. And you have to take the agents, what we call in your half-life, meaning just keep the blood levels up so you don't get this reabsorption or redistribution of the heavy metals. So you can see it's not just like, hey, run and get this urine test, run and get this blood test, hair test, very inaccurate. And you have to look at it, again, you have to look at it in the light of other symptoms and in the light of somebody's history. So one of the things what I teach doctors is, we need to really do better histories, because people's history will determine oftentimes, what happened, their perfect storm, because it's never typically one thing. Typically, I always say it's 3 stressors. And I'll date myself here, but if you remember the movie The Perfect Storm with George Clooney, you might remember that, but actually you're looking at me like, I don't remember The Perfect Storm. Okay, it was a very popular 80s movie. So, but some of your viewers are like, oh my gosh, come on, Dr. Joy, you must know
Well, I was not in the United States yet, so that's my excuse.
In her defense, yeah. So, but it was a movie about the perfect storm. 3 weather fronts come together. And when that happens, a catastrophic storm ends up happening, and a lot of people die, bad things happen. But that's exactly what we see with people who just can't figure out what's wrong. They have a perfect storm, meaning 3 stressors come together: physical, chemical, or emotional. Could be 2 chemical, physical stress, and then boom, bottom falls out, gene gets triggered. Now you're manifesting symptoms you don't like. Eventually, you may or may not get a diagnosis. The thyroid is, we call that the canary in the coal mine. I'm going to date myself once again. So in the old days, they would actually take canaries into coal mines because they didn't have sensitive enough equipment that when certain gases would be released in a coal mine, the canary would actually die first, and you had a certain amount of time to get out. So we call the thyroid that. Today, you see this massive, I just did one of my seminars, and I was even shocked because my first slide was, what in the world is going on? And I presented the numbers in the last 10 years of thyroid conditions, a staggering increase in the last 10 years, diabetes, and then even what was projected. All these hormone-related conditions have just escalated, including obesity. And just getting back from Italy pretty recently, I did some research. The Italians eat 20% more carbohydrates than here in the United States. One thing you don't see in Italy, especially when you leave where tourists are, you don't see fat people, you don't see obesity, and yet they eat way more carbs. Well, as it turns out, it is really the lack of certain toxins that they're not getting exposed to that we are in the US. They have far less something called forever chemicals. We'll talk about that in a minute. They have far less exposure to obesogens. These are types of chemicals that actually cause weight gain and weight loss resistance. And they have far less diabetogens, which their diabetes rates are far, despite eating more carbs, far less. I was lecturing recently at a seminar in Europe, and it was half Europeans and half the people were from the United States. I sat in on a gut panel talking about gut problems. The whole panel was Americans. I think there was 5 of them, and the audience was split, Europeans and Americans. And I wanted to speak up during the thing, but I didn't want to be that guy because they knew I was in the audience, and I didn't want to be like a know-it-all. So I didn't say a word. But at the end, a gentleman from Germany spoke up and said what I wanted to say. He raises his hand and he says, not to be disrespectful to my all-American panel, he goes, but just an observation. Yesterday at lunch, half the table was Europeans, half the table was from the US. And he said, all I heard about from the US was about all of their hormone problems and thyroid problems and gut problems. And so I turned to the colleagues that were around me and I said, do you have any of those problems? Do you have any of them? And none of them had the problems. He goes, so I think this is a toxic issue. Just what you're exposed to in the US versus here, because he talked about everything that you said dietarily, we don't do in Germany. We all fat, we eat low. I mean, he went on this list. He goes, and we don't have these problems. So I'm not sure what you're saying is 100% accurate. Then another woman raised her hand. She said, he's right. Look, when I go to the US, I get all these gut problems. When I come back, she said it after a few weeks, they go away again. The bottom line is that the level, that first slide of what in the world is going on, it is the amount of toxins that we're exposed to today has really caused major havoc with hormone havoc, but it's caused major health issues, a massive increase in autoimmune and these unexplained